Reflect on this lesson. To what extent were the students productively engaged, do you think?
So I think that they did quite well with this. The Articles of Confederation are very difficult to understand. I mean, we're talking about legal language here, so it's not just legal language, it's 18th century legal language. And for that reason, anyways, being able to break it down the way I did to cover so many of the weaknesses, 8 of them, as we went over, at least in the total lesson, including today, in such a way I think was very beneficial to them. Now, getting them to engage with it, if you saw what I did is anytime that I can, I try to go and relate what I'm teaching to the real world, particularly to what they will engage with, if not on a daily basis, at least what they've been heard of through their parents or what they know of exists.
Mhm.
The example I can think off the top of my head is the first issue that was addressed with the Articles of Confederation is the fact that there was no clear leader. There was no one president, for example, to effectively run the executive branch in that sense. And so I had the students imagine and discuss, if you saw, what it was like if there was no principal in school, which obviously is something that would be difficult for them to imagine, but since school is such a big part of their life anyways, they could start thinking of those scenarios. And you saw, I think that was a question, for example, that they really engaged with when I asked them that. So
I actually wrote that down as a question. I said, I noticed you use lots of real world examples that the students could relate to, such as principal and vice principal. Why do you do that in your lessons?
sure. So fortunately, the math teachers know me. Terry's something else. Math, I think, is the best example of this, where even I remember struggling with this as a student, thinking it's just a bunch of numbers on a whiteboard. There's no real world application for it. When am I possibly going to use this? And then I took physics. And when I took physics, for example, I remember I had to go and drop a ball off a ramp and calculate where it would land. And I had to put a cup there. And I had to get the ball to land in the cup just using math. Every time that I had 10 chances basically, and every time that it didn't go in and I had to try again, my grade went down 10 points for the assignment. So I had to actually apply math and then see it work and realize I got it on the first shot, which was really cool to see a win. And I actually did math and then I saw it apply. So that's what I want the students to experience in that sense, but with history. So why is it that even though the 13 colonies went and fought a whole war to, in a sense, get rid of that high leader, King George III, why is it that eventually they decided we need to go back to having someone, strong in power, but they decided to rotate it on like a monarchy in that sense? And so by having the students make those real world connections anyways, they are significantly more interested and realize how it might affect their life. And going forward in the year, this is the part of the year anyways where it's going to be more difficult because it's going over, the American Revolution and such and further back. Whereas everything going forward is just teaching modern government. And so take, for example, later in the year, I'm going to have the students make up fictional warrant articles, fictional laws for the town, for their own town they live in. They take that very seriously because we actually go down, as you know, to the town hall and present those ideas to the Clinton government. And I think the reason they take that so seriously is they imagine what life would actually be like then in Clinton if those laws were passed, how it actually would benefit the town. So I try to kind of go with that mentality throughout the year.
I think it makes it much easier for them to Revolutionary War government.
Yeah.
Is so far back that they're kind of
Why do I have to learn this?
Yeah. So putting it into their language, I think, helps.
Yeah, last year, you hear a lot of, especially with the ancient subjects, why are we learning about the ancient Rome? I started out this year, though, going over ancient Greece democracy and then ancient Rome, the Republic, and now we're seeing the implications of those and how those ideas
transfers.
Yeah.
Do you think the students learn what you intended?
Absolutely. Especially by the completion of that graphic organizer anyways, the fact that they have that written down now and they can refer to that. Continuing today into the lesson, since it was a bit earlier day, what I had the students do is after they finished, we only had a couple more to do, after we went over the rest of the notes, I had the students start writing fictional letters to Benjamin Franklin explaining why they, as fictional citizens of Massachusetts, were unhappy with the Articles of Confederation. So they had to take the knowledge and then apply it. And I like giving them kind of that ability to be a little bit creative there, get into that first person vibe, where they can really show their anger.
Did you read any of the things?
I've gone over a couple anyways. And what I liked and what I had told the students to do is to make sure that they cited specific articles. And so I gave them actually kind of a kid's version of it today. What it was is it just took some of the modern language, some of the archaic words, and just made it into
Modern.
Yeah, and just modernized it. And the kids had to go in and cite exactly what they were referring to, and so that also added another skill they need to be able to use anyways, to use evidence.
To what degree did you alter your lessons as you taught this? Did you change it during the day, throughout the day?
Yep, that's a great question.
And why?
So, but I can actually go back to the question about what would be like without a principal, for example, in a school. I didn't ask that question in my first class. That hadn't occurred to me, that example. And so as the day went on, the questions that I used to help relate the subject to the students got better and better. So it was actually someone in my first class who raised their hand and said, "Oh, wouldn't that be like a school not having a principal?" I thought that was such a great example the kid came up with that I would use that. Yeah, so I mean, it's in that sense, if that one student in the first period is coming up with that idea, then that will probably then work with the other classes because I only teach one subject at one level. So,
if you had the chance to teach this lesson again to the same group of students, would you do anything differently?
Well, you saw that I had to have the students copy the graph, which felt tedious. I did have to use 5 minutes of time doing that. And as you know, you can accomplish a lot in 5 minutes. So what would have been nice is if instead the students had the time anyways, what I would have done is I would have had just given them a copy. Copies can automatically 3-hole punch. They can just put that in their binder. Helps them keep organized. It's executive functioning is a challenge for this grade. And then I would have done a ticket to leave, and I would have asked the students, since the members of the newly formed United States, since the Americans are so unhappy with the government that they just created, what do you think is going to happen? Kind of having to make those predictions, because today was supposed to be about Shays' Rebellion.
I saw that was on the bottom, and we cut it out.
Yeah, so the reason I purposely cut that out anyways is because I wanted the students to kind of to not jump ahead in that. I wanted them to just, because if you know what the end result is going to be, the students kind of focus a bit too much on that, for example, and not the how do you get there.
Yep.
And so that's why I wanted them to try to imagine, well, could we potentially have another war over this, and kind of get to that conclusion. And then what we're going to be doing is we're going to watch it on Monday now. We'll watch a video, and it's kind of a cartoon that goes over and explains Shays' Rebellion, so they can then see how the Articles of Confederation, the weaknesses that they examine. They can then see a visual that will explain, well, now this is the results, this is the consequences of it.
Next one. I noticed that you had a student in here kind of makes random noises during class.
Yeah.
But you ignored it. Is this something that happens often?
So that is a near constant with that student. It's particularly challenging. Definitely one of the most energetic, if not most difficult students in terms of general behaviors I've seen like that. Never has become violent or anything, so that's good in that sense, whereas I've had more aggressive students in that sense. But in terms of the distractions, yes, very difficult. Unfortunately, the assistant teacher who's normally during that class, I think was covering someone else, subbing for someone else. So normally, anyways, she would have gone over and I have a series of right here. I have a series of cards. The first warning, second warning, and then go to the focus room because it's becoming too disruptive.
Yep.
And normally we'd be kind of using that. The fact that it was so teacher oriented though that day, I wasn't really focusing. I just ignored them, and the kids have kind of.
I was gonna say that the kids seem to just go along with it, so.
The kids have learned that he's just going to do that, and so every once in a while they've kind of learned to expect a random noise from the back corner in that sense.
Do you have any additional reflections about this lesson?
I can say that was my first time teaching that actually, so the curriculum has changed. And I used to simply kind of have a little discussion about the Articles of Confederation, and now I'm spending 3-4 days on it. So the only concern I have is I want to make sure that the students actually engage with the actual language of the Articles of Confederation. So perhaps next year I would have some sort of a activity where it would break up the Articles of Confederation. They would need to look at the actual wording and kind of then maybe put it into their own words so that they're engaging with that language. So because then you'd be prepared to engage with it when we go over the Constitution. And then maybe what you saw would kind of be the second activity. Okay, now that we've looked at how it all works under the Articles of Confederation, now we're going to look at why it was such a problem.
You wanted me to look for guiding questions. I think your teaching especially contributed to student learning when you led the discussion up there with guiding questions and real life examples. How do you decide when to use this technique? When to lead the debate, when to lead the discussion, and rather just let the kids do it on their own?
Sure. So that's a really great question. So it depends on the type of lesson. That one, for example, was very lecture based where the kids weren't working together. I do a lot of group work, and I like to do it whereas I get the kids thinking and making predictions and kind of get them kind of wondering. I'll give them rhetorical questions that have potentially many different answers, so then we get all these different theories going about a topic. And then I'll say, well, now you're going to do the job of historians. You're going to go and look at these historic sources from the time period. You're going to investigate. You're going to try to come to the conclusion based on whatever evidence you come up with. So it reminds me, there's a book. I can't remember the author. Why don't you just tell us the answer is the name of it. You've probably read it at some point. I had to read it for undergrad anyways. And I really want to avoid just telling the students the information. I want them to have to critically think about it because they're not always just going to have instant access to whatever information. Sometimes you find a question that someone else hasn't answered yet. And so that's important to me, is to help build that critical thinking. Does that answer the question?
What's the follow-up to this lesson? What are the kids going to be doing next after this?
After this? Sure. So they are going to be examining Shays' Rebellion. We're going to be discussing how, it's kind of funny to think about. Basically, the way I look at it is, a second American Revolution almost happens because of how poorly this government is going. And so we'll talk about that, and then we're going to go and look at the Constitutional Convention, which I've also haven't really taught because, again, this is new to the curriculum a bit. I'll kind of skim over it, but now I think we're going to go more in depth with it. And I was thinking of an activity that I saw a teacher, when my student taught do. It's called a farce book poster. And so basically the students will kind of have to go, I'm going to have them do a little research paper. They'll be assigned someone who was on the Constitutional Convention. And I'll just pick kind of the big heads for it. And there'll be all different sides of people who are supportive of the Constitutional Convention for various reasons and wanted the new government versus some people who wanted to keep the Articles and a weaker government. And they'll do all their research and write a paper about that. And then they need to make a fake Facebook account. So it's called a farce book poster. About that person, kind of showing like who their friends would be, who their enemies would be on the Constitutional Convention, what their ideas were, make like a fake comments and stuff that they make to each other that gives across that information. They'll have to present that to the class, so that way the whole class then can fill in a graphic organizer and have some basic ideas of what the major issues and ideas were.
that kind of brings it back to the
And that kind of
real life